WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore positive. It was a blue sky, but it was a gray sky over Fenway Park. We're hoping for blue skies this weekend. We're going to have some gray skies. I don't know. I mean, opening weekend sweep of the Boston Red Sox. Marty Conway, good to have you aboard. It's good to be anywhere when they're playing baseball and people can come to games and all this is happening. I know you watched. I follow you out on social media. I think all of us who love baseball and sort of coming back to it, making various observations about all of this. And of course, you're in the corridor. The Nationals. Do they still play baseball down there? I'm not sure. Huh?
Unbelievable. I do think you're going to find out in this case, because I was sharing this with somebody yesterday. I think there's a tremendous amount of irresponsibility in this particular situation, because they're the only team. Look, everybody knows what the protocols are. They've gone through this now for last season into this season. They made amendments. They could get vaccinated. There are a lot of other things that you can do. And in this case, I think they're going to just find some, lax protocols, lax responsibility, just sloppy all over sort of stuff. And it may get to the point where Major League Baseball has to decide, look, if we find out, what the situations occur, too many people together, whatever it is, no mask wearing, that you'll forfeit these games because, this is stacked up games, not just for the Nationals, but for the Mets and their opponent. And now the Atlanta Braves coming in and missing a game. So,
Well, it's like the
I,
pandemic's over, right? We're all just running around having a good time, whatever.
yeah,
And everything that was there last year is there this year, all the
yeah,
bubbling and all the things we talked about.
yeah,
Now we just talk about, well, if my wife has a shot, we're all cool. Well, I don't have a
yeah,
shot, so we're not all
right.
cool, right?
Yeah, well, there are 29 other teams that seem to have managed their way through this all spring, no issues. They all got on airplanes, chartered planes, by the way, got to their destinations, were able to get the season started. But for whatever reason, the Nats weren't able to do that. So I think there'll be some more look into it. I don't think anything will happen, but I think coming out of it, Major League Baseball could look at teams in the future and say, "Look, these games won't be made up. You'll forfeit if you have XYZ, sort of outbreak in your own team."
Well, you've watched a lot of baseball. You dedicated your life to baseball when you were a younger man. Now you're educating these youth here at Georgetown via satellite and other ways. And you can always follow Marty out at LinkedIn as well as out on Twitter. I just want to ask from a first weekend of observation from an Oriole fan standpoint that they would open a season in Boston, play the way they did, pitch the way Means did. The Zimmerman story is as good as any, the Cedric Mullins in the early case. But the Zimmerman thing, the local thing,
Mhm.
you were around for Traber and Bill
Yeah,
Ripken mania after Cal Ripken mania was there. I mean,
yeah,
Brooks talked with a funny accent, but I always felt like he was from Arbutus. Always felt like it felt
right.
like such a local thing. And you're the guy who's always preached this. So certainly from the baseball perspective, it's a local endeavor. It's a local game, getting
Ah,
local people excited.
yeah.
Dude, Zimmerman's friends and family were heckling the Red Sox out loud at Fenway during a sweep. It was a
Mhm.
pretty glorious thing if you love baseball and love the Orioles.
Yeah, just 159 to go, right? So we won't really know the meaning of these first three games until we play another 159. Earl Weaver used to say he knew what kind of team he had at around 100 games, literally with 60 to go. He didn't really want to necessarily make any firm observations about his team, in terms of speculation until they had played 100 games. So, but yeah, look, like you said, baseball's the reason why it flourishes over time. It's because of its local nature. It's embedded. Look, football teams are local teams, but they only play 8, 9, 10 times in their stadium a year. We read about them a lot. Baseball teams play in their home stadium 80 times a year, twice the NBA, twice the NHL. So there's much more of a local embeddedness. So anytime that you can get, a Jim Traber, gosh, a Cal Ripken, Billy Ripken, you mentioned it, Bruce Zimmerman, anytime you can get someone in your system like that and bring them through and get them to the major leagues and they have even one day of success, that's something to celebrate and an opportunity. So no matter what happens for the rest of this year with this team, if there are some stories like that that can develop, that's what they need. Because look, you're in year 3 of what I guess everybody speculated would be a 5-year rebuild. You're I look at it this way: you're sacrificing 3 years at least of profits, maybe 4, with the hope that you get to a fifth year or whatever that is, and that you're able to recoup that. I wouldn't go into a casino and bet, hoping that on the fifth hand is the one that I hit. I'd want something more secure. So um, look, hopefully we're going to find out how good the Orioles are. We're going to find out how bad the Red Sox are at some point after, 60 or 100 games, and then we'll be able to analyze it.
Well, forget on the field, off the field. How about just access to having the game? So I'll give my story. My story is I cleared my schedule on Thursday to watch baseball, right? They moved the game to Friday. I had appointments that I could not move that I made on Friday because there was no baseball on Friday and I run a business and blah, blah, blah. So I found myself pinched out in the Towson Timonium area. I do not have cable at the radio station anymore because there's no one there to watch cable anymore, right?
Mhm.
So sports bars aren't really even open, really. And it's opening day. I'm an Oriole fan. I pay for my Masson, right? I've
Right.
been shown no spring training at all. And I literally found myself on Hart Road in the second inning of the game. And I did what every normal blue-blooded fan, orange-blooded fan would do. I put on the fan, WFAN or whatever they call it. I don't even know their call letters. I don't know their call letters. Hell, man.
WJZFM,
J W
WJZFM,
JFK, is that what they are?
JZFM.
JZFM.
Right.
105.7, the fan.
Right.
The big bad boy. So anyway, I put it on and I listened to a couple of kids call the game. It's the first time I'd ever heard their voice, like
Mhm.
literally. So they did push me as a fan. I mean, I want to get into that mind frame because so much we talk about insider stuff. This is just me being a guy who pays for my Masson and it's opening day and I had work and I got pinched in the car. So I wound up listening to, oh man, I stopped at Fadley's and got a crab cake and I took Chris Pica some crab cakes and some Rofo, took him some fried chicken, took him some lunch. And I listened to three innings in the car, like second, third, fourth inning, got home by the fifth inning, sprawled out my crab cake, went to the television, and I saw Palmer and Garceau freezing outside for like no good reason. I need to understand all of this. And then Melanie is the post-game person, I think.
Mhm.
I'm just thinking of the things I saw as a fan and the introduction to it. It isn't very familiar. I mean, they have some selling to do. The thing on the radio is the kid that was calling, I don't know one from the other, it was really homery. Every pitch that was near the strike zone was a bad call against the Orioles. So it's really weird. Like listen to that. I'm like, I don't know, but this is the way we're all taking it in. I
Mhm.
know what I would have liked to have done. I would have liked to open my app and like
Sure.
watch the game like your
Yep.
kids would like to watch the game. So
Mhm.
that was my opening day, a little different.
Well, two things about that. Number one, you mentioned your phone. I have mine here because we have it with us all the time within reach. So yes, you'd either like to be able to open your application on the phone and put your Masson application on the phone, watch the game, authenticate yourself in, just like you do with ESPN or CNN, or many of us have been accustomed when we have cable to those kind of environments where we have to authenticate, prove, if you will, that we actually subscribe to this channel at home and then watch it out of home. They're not there yet. We'll come back to that in a minute.
If I
Second
paid the
thing,
$130, would I get the game? Or I don't even
you
know.
you would qualify. So in other words, when Masson can produce this app on a wide scale, apparently it's available to 3 or 4. They've worked it out with 3 or 4 of their providers, none of them around this area, the immediate Baltimore area, where you can open that Masson app, indicate whether you'd like to watch the Orioles or the Nationals game, and it authenticates you by putting in your Xfinity credentials or whoever you buy your cable from to do that. That's the way that it should work. These things take time. Again, Major League Baseball clubs have been doing this. Gosh, I know my friend in Boston put this together for the Red Sox probably 4 years ago. So they've had it for at least that long. So many clubs have this sort of on-the-go capability with your regional sports network to open your application. So that's not there yet. It's there with only 4 that I read on their website, only 4 providers. They've got a long way to go because they need Xfinity and they need some other of the big providers to get with them on that and to make that work. The second thing, though, is this concept of local streaming on radio. And so again, if you're not in your car or you're not listening on a radio device in your home. Most people are now listening to audio via some sort of streaming application. Major League Baseball has a very strict policy, unlike some the NBA and some others, where in terms of streaming, the local provider here can broadcast the game radio wise to a radio device, strictly in your car, in your home, something like that. If you're getting it through any other way, streaming, through an internet protocol address, whatever it is, you can't listen to it locally. You have to have the MLB at Bat app, pay for some sort of service on a monthly basis to listen there. It's different. In the NBA, they look at it differently. They give teams a 75-mile radius around their home arena to say, in any way that you're listening to the game or watching the game, you're doing it through the local provider. Once you get outside of 75 miles, the NBA, we own that. And we think of that like DirecTV and Sunday Ticket. That's sort of an out-of-market experience. You'll pay additionally for that. I really don't get where Major League Baseball is going, not allowing their teams and their local radio rights holders to stream locally so that they can build more. Like you said, you're on the go, suddenly you want to continue with it. Look, if you're not sitting in your car or you don't have some sort of radio device at home, you're just not going to listen to the broadcast anymore. And I think that's a hit that all the clubs should rise up and they should make a different decision in the interest of consumer behavior. So kind of that's where they are here locally. Some of it's done by, the issues of Major League Baseball, and some they've done locally by not developing an app for MASN years ago and getting with the sort of consumer crowd.
I don't even know what to say about this. We always say unorthodox when you're, in a good mood. That's what you call it. Unprofessional. I just keep asking this. This is the question I was asking. And these two kids seem like nice. I mean, they had nice voices and they were broadcasters and they knew the game and they had been around the team and told you what happened in spring training. And it was all of that. And then I started to think to myself, all right, how many people are actually listening? Who wants to listen? Who really wants to watch? And then in my new world, Marty, like I sit here and look at this screen all day and I type and I work and I have a big screen now. And I'm thinking to myself, if I were going to watch an Oriole game, I'd want it to be on the corner right up in here in my screen.
Yeah.
And I certainly would want it to be on my phone. Maybe I'd put it on my phone on my desktop here where I could watch it. But I don't want to go into the living room or sit in bed at 7 o'clock and eat Cheerios and watch the Orioles. I want to kind of take it where it's convenient for me. And I'm an old fart, 52-year-old, semi-white Latin guy, hipster, growing my hair long. And then when I get it, over the first weekend, the games were long. It was cold. Why is Jim Palmer freezing out in the cold? Calling these games. Seriously, Marty, I'm not being mean. I'm just like, who's making decisions around there?
Yeah, I think, well, number one, Major League Baseball yet hasn't allowed teams to travel their broadcasters yet. So I suspect that sometime when the weather warms up by June, they'll probably
Can't they
relax
sit
that
them
rule.
somewhere warm?
But yes, I think the second part of that is, I again, knowing what the setup is at Camden Yards versus say in the warehouse or they've had all winter potentially to do this, or in their studios in Hunt Valley, wherever they are, is to put them in that sort of environment, because the cutaway shots are the cutaway shots, right? So that you can do whatever you want to do in between innings or as you get back to pitches.
Palmer sounded like he was shivering at a couple of points. He literally sounded like he was shivering.
Yeah. So the other thing too is, as I understand it, the COVID protocols at all the ballparks are that the press boxes and broadcast booths have to remain open. You can no longer put the glass in front and close them, do different things like that. So look, the decision as to where they put them belongs there. Last summer, the decision was to put them at the ballpark. So there was sort of a background, but they didn't start playing until June last year. That's a whole different thing than playing on late March and early April. So the decision, if it were my decision, would have put them in a enclosed environment in the warehouse or someplace like that, or they already have a studio where they could have put them in and watch the game. That's what most people are doing. In the NBA, that the broadcasters are either going to the arena if they can, or they're calling it from monitors in their studios at NBC Washington or different places like that. So not necessary to be at Camden Yards if there's no games there.
Marty Conway is here, and it's not necessary that he's here. He's here by choice, which always strikes me as odd. You can find him out at LinkedIn, on Twitter, anywhere where good conversation, intelligent and wise conversations exist about sports and about the business of sports. All right, so I do want to go back to like selling tickets and how weird it was. I mean, I felt sorry for the Red Sox. I mean, Charlie Steinberg's up there building the Worcester thing, and I see him online, and there's no one at the games. They allowed whatever small percentage, so there was no vibe. And I started thinking, like, I want to go to opening day, and could I get a ticket? And could my buddy Marty find a couple of tickets, and maybe we would go out there? And I think, well, it doesn't look like it's going to be any fun. I mean, yeah, just from the things I want to do on opening day, having a good time, and the way I want to experience opening day, from a social aspect. The reason I go to opening day is to run into my buddies like Marty and people I know. But the notion that I'm going to interact with the game now this way, right? Whether it's Melanie or whether it's Rob Long or whether it's Jim Palmer, or whether it's Scott Garceau or two broadcasters whose names Jeff and I don't want to be disrespectful, but I don't literally know, right? So I'm trying to figure all this out as to who the next Chuck Thompson's going to be and why we're going to get excited. I saw some, like, I was never the biggest Gary Thorne guy. Gary Thorne's a hockey broadcaster that they imported in here anyway. But finding, dare I say, and I don't want to be disrespectful, a saleswoman for this. I saw their new PR crew. They haven't contacted me. I reach 100,000 people a day. I only love the Orioles. My last name's like, they're never going to reach to me for me to sell their product. I'm wondering who's going to get people excited. And I don't, if they think it's these two broadcasters on radio calling balls and strikes, or if they think it's this nice young lady, Melanie, who does post game with Jim Palmer, or if it's Palmer and Garceau, I don't know. I know they think, well, if Ryan Mountcastle, they'll all come back. I think there's a whole presentation issue here where they don't put the games where young people can even find them. I'm now a young enough guy that I sort of expect the game to come where I want it when I want it. And I'm not a young guy. I don't know what they're doing. I mean, on the field, I know what they're doing. They're blowing it up and they're trying to win. And once they win, everyone will come back. But I think between now and then, Christmas night in July and the Star Wars Jedi night, and I don't know what else, but I think like the marketing of this, they have a television network that they've ignored. It feels to me like they're trying to leave Baltimore, and you and I have been back and forth a million times, and you're convinced they're not, and I'm going to go with that premise that all of you are smarter than me, and you probably are. But if they're staying and they're trying to do something, let's talk about the All-Star game, because John got himself involved in that. And one thing you can do when you suck is make some noise and be on the correct side of history, right? So I tweeted out that they're on the correct side of history. And clearly I believe the Atlanta Braves were on the wrong side of history. I mean, it was quite an ish storm politically over the weekend. And even though I'm told to stick to sports, no one sticks to sports, Marty. It's impossible, right?
Not anymore. No, that intersection has been crowded now for a long time. It used to be sort of what I call the no-fly zone, because people didn't want to do it, but that has all changed, and you have to understand and read the room and do what that is. To me, there were a couple. Look, I'm not surprised by the decision. I've said that publicly. I've said it privately. I'm not surprised by the decision. What I was surprised by was the Good Friday news dump of it. I thought that, to me, and so as I talked to more people over the weekend, I read more about it. I read how the decision and talked to people how the decision came down. This was Rob Manfred acting out in front of, say, his executive council or the other 32 owners. I mean, the other 22 owners who are not on the executive council, and et cetera, et cetera. So
repeat that again, because I did not spend the whole week reading the back room. This is where you become invaluable, quite frankly.
Yeah. So there's an 8-person executive council in Major League Baseball. That would be 8 owners who would be truly like a board of directors for Major League Baseball. The Rockies are on that. The Royals, or the several, the 8 owners that are on
different than the council that was on the television committee that voted on the money, but similar.
So this is the same
way that football has.
This is a regular, a regular, week to month to month like I said, best way to say it is a board of directors for the commissioner. He can go to them and say, here's what I'm thinking. What are we thinking about this? Or decisions that have to be made, when he's not going to take it to the total, 30 owners type scenario. So there was some consultation there. It wasn't a great deal of consultation. Where Rob spent most of his time was talking to former players. There's something now called the Players Alliance. I think Curtis Granderson is the president of the Players Alliance, which is former players. There's a subset of those former players that are African American players. So I think Rob spent a lot of time talking to people in those channels. And my take is this, is at the end of the day, he decided to take the heat off of the players and put it on him, Major League Baseball, the central office, et cetera, to do it. And I think some of this has to do with the fact that there's a collective bargaining agreement coming due after this season. So I think there's a chit across the table, a very big one, frankly, to the players here. What he didn't want to see the players put in a position of doing is, once we start all-star balloting in, May, whenever that is, to have players asked every day, Mike Trout, Mookie Betts, et cetera, are you going to go to Atlanta?
Which side are you on? Are you taking a knee or are you
Exactly.
not taking a knee?
Exactly. And that would have gone on for more than a month. And as the game drew closer and closer, there would have been more pressure, and there would have been a player, two, three, four, maybe several, who would have said, for whatever reasons, and maybe they would have come out and said the reason that they wouldn't go, or they would have feigned an injury so they didn't have to show up. And I don't think that Rob wanted to see that overhang for the next 60 days around baseball, when he could change that narrative with one decision. Now, is he super unpopular in Atlanta and the surrounding area? Of course. Gary Bettman is very unpopular in Montreal and other places like that, and that will continue. But I think he wanted to sort of shift the scene, if you will, just like a Hollywood movie, quickly shift the scene to something else. Now, the question now becomes, where does the game land? Now the decision is made to move it, where does it land? And I think that is a little more precarious, because he has to find a place that is literally the polar opposite of Atlanta, that doesn't have the division, that doesn't have anything underway in their legislative chambers. And so I think there are just a few places where that could be. He also needs a place that could get 60, 70, 80, maybe even 100% a capacity in mid-July, which I think is also going to be difficult to do. So I think I'm coming around to this now. I think New York has been a place that, if they want to host a game locally, because baseball is centered in Park Avenue, they could do it there. Probably Citi Field, because they hosted the game 5 or 6 years ago. They would know how to do it. I also think there's an emerging opportunity that might actually be the place, which is in Colorado. I think the Colorado Rockies, their owner is on the executive committee. I think he probably knew that this decision was coming. He could have offered a safe place to it. And then lastly, you saw the entree that John Angelos and Brandon Scott made, which is bring it to Baltimore, bring it to Maryland. We have voting rights stability. We have a history of civil rights and human rights support. So I think there's a
Well, that
short
would be
list.
something, right? Like, I mean, first thing I
Well,
tweeted out was Brandon Scott does not know how this works. I mean,
well,
the Angelos family sued all their partners. I mean,
yeah,
they are
yeah.
pariahs of the
Mhm.
highest. They screwed having the game here a couple. They had the game and screwed it up by suing the learner. I mean, all of that.
Yeah.
I can't fathom that baseball is going to let John have the game unless it suits baseball and there's no other, unless it's
So,
San Juan and there's no other place to put it. I
well,
don't think it's San Juan,
yeah,
right? Like,
I don't necessarily think so. Look, I think it could it be on the short list. Here's my case for why it could be on the short list. So next year's game has already been determined to be the Dodgers. That's in 2022. In 2026, it's already been determined to be in Philadelphia, right? So there's 3 years, 23, 24, 25, that are available for bid. So if you were thinking of bidding for one of those 3 years, you don't want the game right now, because they're not going to bring it back to you in 2 or 3 years. If you were not thinking that you were bidding for the game, now suddenly there's an emergency opportunity. You could be the landing spot for that, right? Now, the second thing is, I don't think that Maryland in 22, 23, in 23, 24, 25 would be a logical place for them to go because it's going to be in Philadelphia in 26. And they have tended not to be in the same geographic area. I looked at this within usually 5 years, right? They just had it in Washington a couple of years ago. So in terms of in the regular order of business, how this thing gets bidded out, I don't think Maryland and Baltimore is going to be on the short list then. So suddenly now this might be the one and only opportunity in the next 5 or 6 years to get it. So it could be that. Do I think it's at the top of the short list for all those reasons that you just said? No, of course. I don't think they're favored in that regard. But having said that, baseball needs to put it probably someplace where they can handle it, do it quickly. I don't know if Baltimore and their staff could fire this up that quickly to do it. I do think it's now looking at maybe a place like Milwaukee, New York, or perhaps Colorado. Those are the 3 places that I think are one of those 3 is probably most logical for it to land.
Republicans boycotting baseball and talking antitrust. I mean, the reason the team exists in D.C., the dirty secret was antitrust, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the reason the Nationals happened there, because people were agitated because of antitrust. It always gets brought up. It's only been 15 years since it's been brought up, but there's no reason for baseball to have an antitrust exemption, right? Other than the fact that 100 years ago they sought it out and that's a political pull to have it happen. This is a little sticky, right? And everyone with a red hat and a Trump flag's pretty dug in. I think we've all seen that, right? So this isn't just going to go away nice and neatly, for the right side. That this is a little shot across the bow from baseball and from Manfred to take this on. I would think there's going to be some high heat for him within the framework of the sport that I don't know how safe he is, but this may cost him his job. I thought about that on Friday too.
Well, I do. I think Rob has a long history of he was the chief labor negotiator before he became commissioner. So he probably has, I would guess, at least 25 years in the game. This is one of those things. Here's why I think it depends on where and how it lands, right? One of the things, like we've already determined the Atlanta thing isn't going to happen. We're moving on. If they land it in a place and they have a really good experience, right? The draft is part of the All-Star game now. If that goes well, if the home run derby is this incredible scene somewhere, and if the All-Star game is whatever the All-Star game is, 2 days after the All-Star game, if you're talking more about the game that just happened versus where it could have been in Atlanta, then I think there's no issues and it's blue sky for him going forward. If it gets rained out, if there's some sort of
Well, you just made your case for Milwaukee, didn't you? I mean, there's your Milwaukee case right there to say, look, we got to play the game.
Yep.
Right? Literally.
Yep. Yeah. So they've got a dome. They've got all those things.
And the last time it was there, I was there, and it was an ish show. It was an embarrassment. It's still something we talk about 20 years later.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like I said, I think that's if it's a good show the day or two after, and nobody's talking about what could have happened in Atlanta and why, then I think he's fine and he moves on into the labor negotiations. I don't think Rob is in jeopardy immediately because of the impending CBA. He's in the best position. He's the best experienced person between his labor experience and now his commissioner experience to lead the owners through that. But we'll see. I think he's trying to build bridges into the CBA because he knows that might be a generational CBA. This might be a generational collective bargaining agreement because the players seemingly have dug in over the fact that they've had to retrench over the last 5 or 6 years, lost some leverage that they used to have. And so I think this is going to be a very, very difficult collective bargaining agreement process. And I think Rob will probably do whatever in his power to try to build some bridges going into it so that the outcome that there's not a canceled spring training, that we're not counting down the days in March, like we were last year in the COVID experience. That would be a death knell for baseball from an economic standpoint.
Marty Conway is here, the good professor at Georgetown. You can follow him out on Twitter and out on LinkedIn. Our friends at Liberty Pure providing solutions for us and the clean water. Big shout out to Doug there. I just want to say this about John and about being on the correct side of history on Friday and him putting out how many of the other 28, 29 owners or ownership groups are really pissed at Manfred. I had to wonder that aloud because the Braves clap back at it with the tomahawk on the letterhead, and it just I thought this with Jerry Jones in the NFL when everything went down, and Bob McNair and the inmates and running the asylum, and like all of the things that were said that were insensitive and quite frankly offensive, and would be offensive to Curtis Granderson or anybody else. Offensive to the guy named Aparicio, whose family came here from Venezuela. Um, I I'm interested to know what that back room looks like, because that's the only back room that matters, right? With the NFL, the fact that Roger might have been a little lefty, about the Wembley knee, probably didn't play real well then. And I know we've come, I don't know. Have we come a long way? You tell me. I don't. We certainly have come 3.5 years since the Wembley knee, and we're still talking about this issue. And now you have a sport unilaterally on a commissioner's note just saying we're pulling an All-Star game 90 days out because you people are crooked down there. I mean, you're running crooked, racist, anti-American policies. And a lot of places are, as you pointed out, there are only a handful of places they can even take the thing and not have that issue. Thankfully, this is one of them. But John stands up. John's already a pariah in the room, right? So, I mean, it is what it is. It's easy for him to jump out and be a maverick, as it were. But what does that room look like? I mean, I would think Rob's pretty unpopular Easter weekend.
Yeah, well, there were, like you said, there were only two statements issued, one from the Braves and one from the Orioles. I didn't see anything else publicly. Maybe I missed it from any of the other 28 teams on this issue, who I think, quite frankly, as owners, probably would like to just let that set because they don't have any interest. Maybe they just recently hosted the All-Star game. They're going to host it in the next couple of years or few years, so they don't want to embroil themselves in.
Well, this was John's chance to throw a punch, and he did. I mean, I don't know if
Exactly.
anybody
It was
heard.
free.
I mean,
Yeah, it was a free shot, right? Because it's not going to cost anything, and it emboldens him in terms of where his political positions are, and I think everybody knows that going into that, so it's not a surprise. But look, I think at the end of the day, this is going to be about economics, and if there was any indication that any corporate sponsors of Major League Baseball were willing to sit out, pull out, whatever it is, and he avoided that, and so he kept more money in the business. I think that would be a feather in his cap. On the other hand, if they in the next 60 days sign Delta, or look, the irony about this is Coca-Cola was one of the big opponents, publicly of saying this. Coca-Cola stopped their Major League Baseball sponsorship 2 years ago. So they just said this doesn't fit our profile. If they were to reel Coca-Cola back into some sort of sponsorship deal, then I think Rob's position is sealed for the next 10 years because he could count on all that type of stuff. So, look, I think the farther we get from the decision, the less we're going to talk about it. I think Georgia will be sort of a self-contained fire, if you will. But as I tweeted the other day, look, the Yankees, the White Sox are to host the Yankees in the Field of Dreams space in Dyersville, Iowa. Iowa just passed voting rights that parallel almost to a T, with some exception, what Georgia did. And so is Major League Baseball going to continue to endorse the White Sox hosting that game in a made-up stadium in Iowa, or will they look at that and say, maybe that's not a place we should be either until this works itself out? So, stepping into these type of scenarios, it's only happened a few times. It happened in Phoenix with the NFL in the Super Bowl. It happened in the NBA in Charlotte with the NBA All-Star game, and now it's happened in Major League Baseball. So it doesn't happen that often, but I do think the long short of it is it will be sort of a self-contained blaze in Atlanta and throughout Georgia, and I hope that Rob thinks that this can help contain it there, and as opposed to spreading throughout Major League Baseball, almost through the whole summer.
Marty, for you being a guy back in the 80s and 90s that sold the sport of baseball and loved baseball, and now you're all about the education, at Georgetown and teaching people in sports and business and sort of sociology. This has really been quite the play over the last 5 years of Trumpism in America and the flag and the plague and running a business and which side you're on. And the fact that it's gotten to to the baseball field maybe last, right? I mean, they were the first ones on the scene at 9/11 and seventh inning stretch and God Bless America and like all of that, right?
Yeah.
That and obviously the Jackie Robinson part of this and where baseball has been over all of these years, and
Mhm.
Hank Aaron, Hank Aaron's franchise in the middle of this just weeks after he dies. um, the flag and America and politics and the society and how I guess sports and entertainment and music have moved this society forward from our grandparents, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are two sports in this country that are most associated with the American flag. One is baseball, and the other is NASCAR, and both have done that willfully in order to do it. But baseball has a long history, positive history of breaking the color barrier, and what's happened since then. And so there's a lot of legacy. They just integrated the Negro League statistics into Major League Baseball, sort of officially. So they've been trying to make steps to do that. But again, these are very, very careful times. And look, I just think that an example is Roy Williams stepped down as coach at North Carolina the other day. And I don't know if you noticed this, but in his statement, in his press conference, he said, "I'm just not the right person for the job anymore." And what I think he was referring to is he just isn't the type of person that can coach in a transfer portal world where players have all kinds of options and going through that. And I think that's the challenge for a sport leader now, as you see that, whether it's Roger Goodell, Adam Silver, Rob Manfred, or on and on. And that is, are they the right person for the time? Because if you don't match the time, if you're trying to hold your sport to a legacy that you can no longer hold them to, then I think it's not good. And that's when owners have to make a decision and say, this isn't the right person for the job, not because they're not qualified, but I just don't think they match the time. And I think that's key right now for sport leaders is you have to be able to match the time. That's the challenge that the NCAA has had. They're viewed to be as out of step with their players and the people that support them. And so those are the challenges of putting the right people in the right positions in sports. And that's what we try to sort of raise in our program at Georgetown, which is understanding how this evolves and how you have to adapt. And if you can't, perhaps it's time for you to step aside and allow somebody else that can take the sport further, faster down the road and where they want to go.
Ever since I started picking up a pen again during, these segments, I write stuff down. You said something really early on. You said, read the room.
Yeah.
And this is the first thing you said is read the room about Manfred's like read the room. And not everybody in the room reads the room the same way, right?
Right. Yep.
And certainly with billionaires and white old billionaires of various backgrounds and how they got there and the way they would see all of this. But for John Angelos, reading the room is interesting because I'm not even in the room. They don't want me back. Greg Bader told me to go away and never come back, right? But I am the guy that speaks to that message on Friday and saying, "Good for you, John." And I have no axe to grind one way or another politically with John. We're probably on the same side of the fence. I get the vibe. And Marty, I've been doing this a long time here out on Facebook and Twitter and now through the wars of Trumpism and, everything that's going on and Freddie Gray. And I'm going to tell you what, it's nice that he's cozied up to Brandon Scott and they're issuing a little thing and they're going to chase the All-Star game that you've given me 100 reasons why they won't get anyway. Maybe there's one reason why they would get it, but they probably won't. It's a San Juan thing, right? But I just think like 85% of people who call themselves Orioles fans that I know, 85, maybe a bigger number. First off, they're mainly white. All due respect to Alan McCallum and a few African American people I know. I don't even really know any Latin people here. Most of the Latin people that I see here in Baltimore would be much more aligned with soccer, football, and you and I have talked about that than they are going to an Oriole game. They're from a different part of the world. They're not from Venezuela. I would just say this. John probably, in reading the room, I think he did the correct thing. I tweeted out that he did the correct thing. But the room for his fan base
Mm-hmm.
is probably quite agitated that he's one of them Democrat socialist libtards. You know what I mean? Like, I can just feel that. And I felt that on the Brave side of things and from the the real idiot Republicans that mouth off on Twitter immediately about every Mike Huckabee about everything. Let's boycott baseball, right? I don't know that anybody's canceling the Orioles here, but I think politically, John reads the future, and I think he's on the correct side of history. But reading his room right now,
Yeah.
I don't know on Friday. I mean, I
Yeah.
really don't.
Yeah, no, in terms of fans, I think you're right. Demographically, that probably is an accurate description of the fan base, particularly for Orioles. Maybe it's different for the Ravens for sure. Um,
And
but
different for the Nationals too, which have a
oh yeah,
different.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, completely. That's the other thing here that we didn't, we haven't gotten into a little bit, but we continue to see this shaving of the crowd, the fan base, I should say, or at least ticket buyers. Let me segregate the difference between fans and ticket buyers. I think people who would speak out against what John Angelos' statement and the Orioles statement was, if they were to speak out publicly against that, I would say there's a very good chance that those people don't buy a ticket to the Orioles anyway. I just find that most people who speak out in that regard, that say, I'm not going to buy a ticket again, or I'm not going to do something again, they weren't much in the way of your core buyer to begin with, because your core buyer makes decisions based on family, entertainment, bringing people in from out of town, raising their kids to be sports fans, all those different things to do that. So when somebody says, I'm not doing this anymore, I think generally speaking, those people weren't doing what they said they were not going to do before. And so but the second part is, again, the Nationals have been very quiet about this. They don't make a particular statement. Last year, during the George Floyd scenario, they put out a very sort of vanilla, flat statement. I think they were criticized for it, but again, the criticism sort of went away after a while. There was another fire to chase down, uh, and so the Nationals have been just sort of reaping little bits at a time. Um, in the research that I did a few weeks ago for something else, I came up with about a $75 million revenue difference between the Nationals and the Orioles in 2019, the last time that we had a full blown season. So, you know,
And what would be
our,
different about 2022 or 23 in a normal environment? You know
yeah,
what I mean? It's only
yeah,
gotten worse, not better.
right, exactly. I think that continues to trend that way. And again, that's with each team having their own media contracts, which I think could happen in the future and things like that. So if the trend, if that revenue is flowing south into Washington, D.C., in places like Montgomery County, Howard County, PG County, Anne Arundel County, places like that, then that is, that's what the future looks like. And so I think the Nats look at that and say, we continue to see an inflow towards us away from those mid Oriole Nats counties. I think that's another factor, and all of these different things that are going on, whether you have the All-Star game, whether you don't, whatever you do with your television product, is you now have a direct competitor 42 miles from home plate to home plate. And that's just not something that beyond 15 years ago, leadership of the Orioles ever had to think about. That was just a given. That was like having a franchise in Orlando and having Tampa as a market that you could draw from, right? The secondary market was actually bigger than the first market. Well, that secondary market now is gone, and they have to look at places like York and Frederick and Hagerstown and other places like that, which there just aren't the population centers, not the media centers, and there's not the money there. And so I think that's what sets up the challenge for them going forward. So it's nice to have a statement. I think that puts them, in a position in sync locally with local government, but I just don't know how much that's going to matter going forward, because as we know, Baltimore City really contributes very little to the Orioles deal. It's almost entirely driven by state revenues, the Maryland Stadium Authority, and all that.
Marty Conway, I always say you're the smartest guy I know about all this stuff, especially on the baseball side as we get ready for opening day. For anybody asking on the All-Star game, do you think there's any chance? I poo-pooed it because of the politics of it. You've given a couple of viable places. Is Baltimore a viable place?
I think it's a viable place. I think a lot depends on how baseball decides. Look, when these things are run, this is the one game that Major League Baseball runs a year, right? There's playoffs, but those are hosted by the home team. This is a game that they come in and run, so they only have to do it once, and they're not really equipped to run baseball games, so they rely upon staff at the local club to do it. But if they want to keep it close, a car ride away, a train ride away, then Citi Field is one, Oriole Park is another in terms of a train ride away. If it's something beyond that, If they want to go back to Hank Aaron's, origin, then it's Milwaukee. If Colorado fits because there's no a state legislative agenda going on, and they haven't hosted it in Colorado since I think 1998. So it's been over 20 years since they've had it there. Could it be a spectacle there? So I think those are the options. I think a lot of Baltimore's opportunity depends on how aggressive Milwaukee makes, how aggressive Colorado makes, or whether baseball says, "Hey, we're going to keep it in the borough of Queens, and it's an easy, 7 train ride for our staff to get out there because you got to spin up new logos, you got to spin up all sorts of security, transportation issues. There's so many things that take 2 years for
And the
local
Orioles
teams
don't
to
have
do.
staff to help that. I mean, they're
Yeah,
trying to put on their own circus every night for the next 90 days,
yeah,
right?
and the staff that's there pretty much was not there the last time they hosted it. So this would be an entire new education. So, like I said, do I think they have a shot? Sure, I think they have a shot. I think there's probably about 5 teams that could do it. I think they'd be in the 4 or 5 slot, perhaps not in the 2, 3 slot, but depends on what those first 2 or 3 options look like. And maybe Rob has already made his mind. He already had indication from Colorado or Milwaukee, hey, we'll take this if you're going to make this decision. So he wanted to have 2 separate decisions, right? He wanted 2 announcements. He wanted the leaving announcement and he dumped it on Good Friday afternoon. I think he wants to make the landing announcement in the broad daylight, maybe even in person with the mayor, with the governor, whoever else. I think they'd like to do that this week or as soon as possible because there's a lot of agreements to be signed. There's a lot of police support. There's so many different things that you need the city and the state to come forward on.
Why you do it 5 years ahead of time?
That's why if they're not having those conversations in Baltimore already, then it's probably not coming. But like I said, those are just some of the broad brush scenarios that I could see, depending upon what happens in those first 3 or 4 options.
Something magic happens. All right, Marty. Basketball's been great too, right? I mean, it's felt like a good sports sort of thing. Like sports is getting back into the kick of things a little bit, right?
So it's a rhythm, right? We talk about, right? We have the rhythm of Monday night is that's when we host, that except for one time in the last however many years, we had a championship game on Monday night, early April. The Masters is coming up in the first and early second week of April. That's when our body clocks, our rhythm, sports rhythm just functions that way. And when those things were taken away and or moved to the fall, that's why there wasn't TV ratings and all that. Like we're just rhythmic the way that we are in sports. And now we're starting to get back into it. Hopefully we'll be able to get to go to games at some point, and that'll be the last part of feeling like we belong because we'll be able to go when we want, sit where we want, eat what we want, talk to who we want, all those different things, like you said earlier, that are part of the experience, not just buying the ticket to go to watch the 9 innings. That's just part of what we do. We like to spend a lot of time on the way to and from the game doing the kind of things that we like to do, and that rhythm has been gone.
I want to give a shout out to my competitors at the Fan for having the game on. I want to thank them. I saw Getty Lee was pissed over the weekend. They're not putting the Blue Jays games on the radio. Getty's like lost his mind. Getty's like, I can't listen to the games. That's crazy. So at least the old school baseball fans are here, and I think I need to go see a game with you this year. Can we go to a game? I mean, are you going to come to an Oriole game at some point?
Look, if we could both get tickets to the same game, wouldn't that be amazing? That within that 20% limit, whatever it is, the 2 of us would be an ability to do it. So
we'd be in a pod together, but we're not like in the same
right.
family.
We wouldn't be able
pod.
to, right. We might not be able to sit within the same section. Who knows what it's going to be like, but I hope, honestly, I do think by June, I think a lot of these conditions are going to change and you're going to see 50%, 75%. I don't know that in baseball, you'll see 100% in all 30 markets by the end of the season, perhaps, but I do think the start of football season will probably bring the 100% crowds. And I think maybe that's what we look forward to throughout the rest of the year.
Vegas for me. That's what I'm saying. Vegas, baby. Marty Conway, you can find him on LinkedIn. You can find him on Twitter. You can find him down at Georgetown teaching the youth about sports and business and life. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570. We're having wise conversations around here, including with our friends from Wise Markets later on in the week as we welcome a really cool local partnership. Be telling some stories around here as well. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net. We are BaltimorePositive.com.